Rudy Gobert is currently favored to end up with the Chicago Bulls. Donovan Mitchell's in a little bit of limbo. He seems to have some friction with the Utah Jazz management, and Quinn Snyder is no longer the head coach in Utah. That's a team that seems like just blew up quick. We were looking at them in that Mavericks series, and we were expected to win. Certainly when you have Luka miss the first 3 games, we thought they were going to win that series, but they end up losing in 6. Kyle, what do you think is going to happen in Utah? Like, do you think this is a playoff team next year?
Oh, okay. So this is interesting because where Utah kind of stands right now is they are at a crossroad of their organization because you've now for 6 years, I guess 5 years, but 1 year was with Gordon Hayward. But for 6 years, they've made the playoffs every single year, and they won a bunch of playoff series, but never made it further than the second round. And it was the same core. It was Rudy Gobert's been there since 2012. It's Quinn Snyder's been there since 2012. It was Gordon Hayward from 2010 to 2016 or 17. And then it was Donovan Mitchell for the next 5 years. It's been the same core for close to a decade. And now the window feels closed and you slowly pick apart the team. Now it's Quinn Snyder's gone. Then it's going to be one of the other players. Then it's going to be the other player. And then you're in the rebuild. Now, this same thing happened with Portland a couple of years ago. Portland made it to the conference finals in 2019. They stood pat. They didn't make any trades. Then they lost in the first round. Then they lost to Denver in the first round in 2021. And then Terry Stotts gets fired. And then your general manager gets fired. That one was for toxic workplace, but he gets fired. And you trade CJ McCollum. And now the only one left is Damian Lillard. So this is the slow dismantling of the Utah Jazz, or it can be the fast dismantling of the Utah Jazz. Remember when Oklahoma City a couple of years ago was first round, trade for Paul George, Damian Lillard sends them home with the shot, but Paul George re-signed anyways. They just decided we're going to fire Billy Donovan, trade Russell Westbrook, trade Paul George. We're going to do it all in a span of like 2 weeks. So for Utah, you have a choice here. It can be a slow dismantle. It can be a fast dismantle, or it can be bit by bit. Maybe Rudy Gobert goes this offseason and they flip him for the one I'd throw out there, DeAndre Ayton. And then you put Mitchell and Ayton together and they lose in the first round. And then they lose in the play-in game. And then Donovan Mitchell comes up on free agency and they move him. So it depends how Utah wants to go about it. I have no idea what's going to happen to Utah next year because I have no idea what that team is going to look like.
The funny part about Utah is they're one of the better run organizations in basketball, aside from the fact that they don't win championships, because they're always there. They're always in the midst of playoff conversation. And certainly a couple years ago, before they choked it away against a Clippers team that didn't have Kawhi Leonard, that only had Paul George healthy. Kawhi Leonard was missing and injured during the series. The fact that that team didn't come through and make it to the Western Conference Finals and would have posed an interesting challenge for the Phoenix Suns, it closed their title window. And now they're in this full-scale rebuild. I think the tough thing for them is, you have a talented all-star in Donovan Mitchell. And I do think Donovan Mitchell is a good player, but he's not an efficient player. He is a player that does have some serious holes in his game, so much so that the Dallas Mavericks just abused him in that series. Whether it was Jalen Brunson or Luka Doncic, they were both able to fully take advantage of Donovan Mitchell on the defensive side of the court. And offensively, he's a high volume scorer in the sense that he just needs to put up a lot of shots, and he might knock down half of them. He might knock down 30% of them. But the thing with Donovan Mitchell is I don't know if you can trust him without some core pieces around him. And I don't know if the Jazz are going to be able to acquire them back this offseason to really make it work. And I just don't know if investing in Donovan Mitchell is the right move for the Jazz, but I feel like what other choice do they have is the problem.
Well, this is the interesting game of, some people say it's either win a championship or you tear it down. Like, that's how some people describe it. And Utah's kind of in the middle of, like, we could have been totally irrelevant for the last decade, and we've built a nice little team. It makes the playoffs every single year. Sometimes we win a playoff series. One year we were even good enough to be the 1 seed before we lost to Terrence Mann in the playoffs. So that's the question Utah's got to ask. Do we maximize the value of Mitchell and Gobert? Now, there's also rumors that people aren't willing to spend a lot on Donovan Mitchell this offseason, which changes the math of when they actually make the move. But it's interesting.
That's a little bit of banking on Donovan not wanting to be there in Utah long term. I think a lot of other organizations are projecting that he's unhappy with that situation. He might very well be unhappy with that situation, but the fact that they're putting it out there that they're not going to trade a lot says that they feel as though he might want out regardless of what Utah does.
There's an interesting point about this as well, but the point I had before is like, maybe Utah decides the offer I think would be perfect is flip Gobert for DeAndre Ayton, sign Ayton to a 5-year max. And that's our team. We're going to lose in the first round of the playoffs, or we're going to lose in the play-in game, or whatever Utah decides to do. What's interesting about the Donovan Mitchell point is something that after Quinn Snyder left, and there was the report from Woj that Donovan Mitchell was blindsided and shocked by Quinn Snyder's departure, and was a little uncomfy about it. Andy Larson of the Salt Lake Tribune put out this point that's really good. To spell out the situation, CAA, which is a creative arts agency, it's the largest sports agency in the world right now. CAA represented Donovan Mitchell, had CAA represented Woj, released that he was surprised and disappointed about Quinn Snyder's departure, something that had been rumored for months. 0 people are surprised. So that CAA represented Johnny Bryant could get the Utah Jazz head coaching job. Johnny Bryant is one of the 4 finalists for the Utah Jazz head coaching job right now. So it will be interesting to see how that plays out, and whether this is Donovan Mitchell assuming power within the Utah Jazz organization, because Donovan Mitchell is the star of the Jazz organization. And does he want to use that power to finally get Rudy Gobert out of Utah, because they haven't jibed well for years? And there's the famous report that I love that during that those last 4 games, the Utah Jazz against the Dallas Mavericks in their first round series this year, he passed the ball to Rudy Gobert a total of 3 times. So maybe there is something there about Rudy just can't play offense and he doesn't jibe well there, which we'll talk probably about the Bulls and Rudy Gobert a little bit, which would be interesting. But it would be interesting if Donovan Mitchell is assuming power within Utah. If he knows he's going to be there for the next 4 years, let's build the team in his image.
Well, obviously he can get paid the most in Utah when it comes to supermax extensions and all the ways that the NBA incentivizes stars to stay with the team that drafts them. Rudy in Chicago does make a lot of sense from him. He is the betting favorite to end up in Chicago. For them, they definitely do need a rim protector. That is something that Chicago sorely needs, especially when you talk about being in the conference with a Giannis, where you do need some size at the basket, or even the Boston Celtics, who were able to abuse them at points during the year, facing Bam Adebayo in Miami. The Chicago Bulls need a little bit more size to contend. They were just so small against the Milwaukee Bucks, and that's why they were just getting eaten alive. So getting Rudy Gobert is a good move for them to at least take somewhat of a next step, or at least build a better constructed roster. So I do like that move. I mean, they try to get Tristan Thompson in there, and it was a kind of lateral move for them. It didn't really move the needle. Rudy Gobert, as much shit as Rudy Gobert gets, he still is a guy that's a multiple-time defensive player of the year. He still is a guy that will make an all-NBA defensive team. So give Rudy his flowers in that respect. He is going to move the needle in the right direction for the Bulls in terms of improving their defense. When you look at what pieces the Jazz can get back, you mentioned you gain a Vucevic back in a potential deal there. Okay, more offense for the Utah Jazz, and great. But again, we talked about how they got exposed defensively in that playoff series, and they weren't hitting baskets. So they just had a mix of awfulness down that stretch run against the Dallas Mavericks. And going into it, Donovan Mitchell was like a 36 points per game player for his entirety of the playoffs. But then you just start seeing, well, yeah, he does put up that amount of points. Yes. But if he's doing it on 30% shooting, it's not helping your team. It's very Russell Westbrook-ish.
Well, the way I describe it is that Donovan Mitchell is his generation's Carmelo Anthony, which is incredibly good volume scorer. The only difference is Carmelo messed around one year and made a conference finals, so everyone puts Carmelo on this pedestal. But Donovan Mitchell is volume scorer guy, and that's really, really good. And he'll give you 26 points a game. and Utah will lose to teams with better players than Donovan Mitchell, and that's okay. And again, Rudy Gobert is a really, really good player. It all depends about what you're giving up to get Rudy Gobert. If you're giving up Vucevic and Kobe White, yeah, it's a pretty damn good upgrade for the Chicago Bulls.
That's great for them. I mean, I don't know if that's difference between them being eliminated in the first round or being able to at least get to an Eastern Conference Finals, but it is an upgrade. And if you're the Bulls, you just have to be asking yourself, how can we continue to upgrade? The problem is just for the Utah Jazz this offseason, it just seems like every move they could make would be a downgrade.
Well, so I guess you throw in an option of like, wait for your best offer to come available. I still argue if you can get DeAndre Ayton for Gobert straight up, you do it. And maybe you have to throw in a pick somewhere, but whatever the point is, if you're Dallas, who's saying like, we'll give you 2 first-round picks and 2 pick swaps for Rudy Gobert. It's like, yeah, that we'll take that. we'll build our future, and it gives us a chance to maybe acquire another Rudy Gobert down the line. But like, I guess it all depends on what you can get for Rudy Gobert. You don't have to trade Rudy Gobert, just like you don't have to trade Donovan Mitchell. But if someone gives you an offer you can't refuse, I would certainly consider it, because the alternative is to do the same thing that Portland did when I was pounding on the table in 2019. I don't care if Anthony Davis isn't going to re-sign. You trade CJ McCollum and every draft pick you have for 2 playoff runs with Dame Lillard and Anthony Davis. They didn't do it. They blew up anyways in the end. They should have made that move when they had the chance. This is Utah basically like, can we maximize value this offseason like OKC did with Russell Westbrook and Paul George, or do we just let it keep riding out and wait for a better offer to come up?
What would be the best player you could pair with a Donovan Mitchell to make that a championship level team?
Kevin Durant.
Okay, so you're saying that they need someone at the top.
No, Donovan Mitchell needs to be Donovan Mitchell's a volume scorer. He needs to be a number 3 on a team that wins a championship. But that's just because Donovan Mitchell is a very, very good player, and no amount of best of circumstances without like 4 of the top 6 players in the league getting injured would help Donovan Mitchell be the best player on a championship team.
So Utah's really only pathway to becoming a championship level team is to draft stars and get lucky in the lottery and a number of other factors like that, as opposed to, obviously not a lot of free agents are making their way to Salt Lake City.
They can't even keep Gordon Hayward in Salt Lake City.
Which, no disrespect to Salt Lake City. Salt Lake City's a fine city. Just it's not a it's just the place that everyone. It's the place all the NBA players complain about when they have to go there, because there's just not a lot to do in Salt Lake City. But it might be one of those places that they have a nice little vacation home. Maybe go skiing. But that's about the extent of Salt Lake City, which is so fine. No disrespect to it. I mean, it is. It's fine. It just, the point is they're not a free agent destination. So there's no pathway for them to acquire stars via free agency. And obviously they're giving up Rudy Gobert. So their pathway to acquire a star in a trade. And that's what they were going for when they acquired Mike Conley a few years ago. They were hoping Mike Conley could have also helped them, but Mike Conley was just as bad in the Mavericks series in keeping them from obviously winning or moving on to the next round.
That one did work. The Mike Conley trade was an upgrade because they only had to give up like Ricky Rubio or whatever it was, Rubio and Grayson Allen and a draft pick. So like Mike Conley worked out. It's just now Mike Conley is 35 years old, and Mike Conley is now kind of at the very end of his career making a large salary. I think Utah is asking different questions they're not asking how can we win a championship? It's, do we want to remain competitive? Because if Utah sells everything now, they are accepting the next generation of basketball, we are not going to be taking a part in it. We're going to be at the lottery every year for 5 years. We're going to try and get top picks. If you sell now and sell for not immediate returns, then you are going down. But I think part of what makes, like you said at the beginning, Utah one of the better run organizations in the NBA is they've like seamlessly pivoted 4 or 5 times now since like Karl Malone and John Stockton retire. Okay, they were bad for a few years. Then they get Darren Williams, a 2-time All-Star. And then they trade Darren Williams for like Devin Harris and like Derek Favors and a draft pick that became like Enes Kanter or something like that. And then they get Rudy Gobert late in the first round, and he becomes not quite a Hall of Famer, but pretty close to a Hall of Famer late in the first round. And
yeah, he might be close.
Yeah, I mean, he probably won't get it, but he's got as good of a chance as like Al Horford has to a Hall of Famer. And
I feel like the lack of playoff success will long term kill Rudy Gobert, but at least Al Horford now can only say he has a finals run to his name.
I don't know. Like, I guess I guess he's not one of the 75 greatest players and all that stuff, but basically very, very good player.
Hall of Fame. Yeah. Just, the NBA standard for Hall of Fame is the bar's kind of dropped a little bit. So
Rudy Gobert, very
fringe.
Yeah. He's a very, very good player, and they've had two very good volume scores from Gordon Hayward to the year that Gordon Hayward leaves in free agency, immediately draft Donovan Mitchell, and he immediately scores 20 points a game. Like, that's a huge success for Utah.
Thought they were going to be a pure lottery team at that point, but no, they end up getting with Donovan Mitchell, and we haven't really thought of them as a bad team. We thought of them as the most disappointing team, I think, in the NBA. They've been one of the most disappointing franchises because, like I said, they should have capitalized a couple years ago when the Clippers had their stars down, and you still can't beat them then. And then obviously this series, you have Luka gone for the first 3 games and you can't advance in that series. That's a problem with them. They've had chances, they've had their opportunities, but they have failed to capitalize each and every time.
This is the joke I've had about Utah is they've made 6 straight playoff appearances. You know who's eliminated them each of those 6 years? It was first year, Steph Curry, KD, 2017 Warriors. No shame in losing to them. They beat the Clippers in the first round. No shame in losing to that team. Next year, MVP James Harden team that, if they don't go over 27 in a game 7, probably win the finals in 2018. No shame in losing to that team. They won a first round series. No shame there. 2019, it was the Rockets with a slightly lesser version of James Harden, which is like, okay, still weren't supposed to win that series. Okay. Bubble 2020, Jamal Murray. Okay, not great. 2021.
3-1 lead too. We got to throw that
2021, Terrence Mann. 2022, Jalen Brunson. It's like, okay, now it's getting a little more embarrassing.
Yeah, when the tier of competition starts to slide off like that, that's when you have to ask yourself, what are we? Are we a good team? Are we a bad team? Are we mediocre? Again, the Utah Jazz, above anything else, have been disappointing